I live in an old house that listens. The walls creak not because of wind or wood settling, but because they are remembering. Every Friday night, without fail, they whisper, and every Friday night I listen. When I first moved here, autumn of 1973, the house had been empty for years. The agent told me an old family once lived here, but their name wasn't in any record. I didn't care. I needed space, quiet, somewhere cheap where I could write again. The house gave me that, at least at first. The first Friday came and went quietly. On the second Friday, I woke at 11:45 to a sound like footsteps dragging across the hallway carpet. Slow, uneven, not rats, not the pipes, something heavier. When I checked, the corridor was empty, but the smell of damp earth filled the air. I could swear it came from the front door. By the third Friday, I'd started to notice the clock. At midnight, its pendulum always stopped, as though the air thickened enough to choke movement. Then the knocks began. 3 soft taps at the door. I never opened it. That became my first rule. Never open the door on Friday night. Weeks passed. My writing improved, strangely enough, as though the house rewarded me for staying quiet. But every Friday, the whispers grew clearer. They sounded like children playing outside, laughing faintly, though I knew there was nothing but woods for miles. Last Friday, I made a mistake. I looked through the window when the knocking started. Outside, standing just beyond the porch light, were 4 silhouettes. They weren't moving, but they were facing the door, heads tilted as though listening to me breathe. When the clock restarted at 1, they were gone. I thought that was the end of it. But today, Friday has come again. The air feels heavier, the clock ticks slower. And someone left muddy footprints on the inside of the front door. The footprints didn't wash away. I tried scrubbing them with soapy water that Saturday morning, but the stains seemed pressed into the wood, darker than dirt, like something burned in rather than tracked. When I ran my hand over them, the boards felt cold, colder than the rest of the room. All week I avoided thinking about it. I wrote, drank coffee, listened to the radio, and convinced myself it was just old varnish reacting to humidity. But when Thursday came, I started to feel that old weight again, the hush before the clock stopped. By Friday evening, I couldn't focus. Every few minutes, I'd glance at the clock in the hallway, waiting for it to betray me again. 11:30 came, and I decided I wouldn't hide this time. I dragged the old armchair to face the front door and sat with my shotgun across my knees. At 11:58, the house changed. The air grew thick with a smell of rain-soaked leaves and something faintly metallic. The radio died with a soft pop, though the dial glowed on. Then came the dragging steps, slow, deliberate, from the porch to the door. 3 knocks, always 3. But this time, after the third, there was a pause and then a faint voice. "Play with us!" It was high-pitched, almost childish, but hollow, like sound echoing through a tunnel. I froze. My finger twitched near the trigger, but some strange calm came over me, curiosity. I whispered back, "What game?" Silence. Then a whisper directly behind me, "Hide." I spun around, no one, just the chair's shadow stretching too long across the floorboards. The clock had stopped at midnight again. Something scuttled upstairs, quick, light, and playful. Laughter followed, bouncing from wall to wall. The house felt alive, pulsing with sound. The door creaked open behind me, though I hadn't touched it. Cold air rushed in. I shouted into the night, "What do you want?" A soft reply came from everywhere at once, layered voices murmuring in perfect rhythm, "We play by the rules!" And then, just as suddenly, it ended. The laughter, the footsteps, the chill. Only the muddy footprints remained, now 5 of them. By morning, I couldn't shake the sound of that word. Rules. It gnawed at me while I made coffee, while I wrote, while I watched sunlight crawl up the faded wallpaper. I counted the footprints again, 5 distinct shapes, the smallest no longer than a child's hand, the largest as long as mine. They led nowhere, just stopped abruptly, as if the owners had sunk into the floor. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up reading old records about the house in the town library. It had belonged to the Morell family in the 1930s, a husband, wife, and 3 children. One Friday, the entire family vanished. The house was found locked from the inside, dinner still warm on the table, only footprints led to the door, 5 of them. That was the night I realized how wrong it had been to move here alone. When Friday came again, I tried to leave before sunset. I packed a small bag, locked up, and started the truck. The engine turned over twice, then coughed into silence. I tried again. Nothing. I slammed the door and ran inside, heart hammering. The air in the hallway shimmered like heat haze. The clock hands trembled at 11:59. I thought about hiding, but the voice from last week echoed in my head. "Hide!" So I did. I climbed into the small crawl space behind the pantry, clutching my flashlight. I watched through a crack in the boards. At midnight, the door opened on its own. The visitors entered. 5 shadows, thin and flickering, shaped almost like people but stretched wrong. Their movements were jerky, like frames missing from a film reel. They didn't speak this time. They simply began to play, chasing one another, whispering, laughing, without joy. One of them stopped, tilting its head toward my hiding place. Slowly, it crept closer, its shadow stretching across the boards until it touched my boots. The temperature dropped, my breath fogged in the dark. It whispered, barely audible, "Your turn." I shut my eyes. When I opened them again, they were gone. But in front of the pantry, a new footprint waited, smaller than the rest. After that night, the house refused to let me forget. Every board creaked differently. Every window pane seemed to hum under my touch, as though waiting for the next Friday. The small footprint in front of the pantry stayed there, darker each day, like wet ink that never dried. I stopped eating in the kitchen. I barely slept. By Wednesday, I'd decided to test a theory. The visitors followed rules, didn't they? We play by the rules, they said. Maybe that meant there were ways to keep safe, if I understood their game. So I began keeping notes. Each night, I wrote down the sounds, the smells, even the exact time the air changed. I noticed something strange. The whispering never began until I spoke aloud. It was like they were waiting for sound to guide them. On Thursday night, I made my choice. I would keep completely silent on Friday, no matter what happened. When the day came, I nailed shut every window, turned off every light, and sat in the dark with a candle that burned low and steady. The air grew heavier as night approached. At 11:45, the temperature dropped again. The flame flickered blue, thin as a needle. Footsteps on the porch. 3 knocks. I clenched my jaw, said nothing. A long pause, then a voice. "Won't you play?" I stayed silent. Another knock, harder this time. "You have to speak. That's the rule." I covered my mouth with my sleeve and held my breath. The knocking stopped. For a full minute, the only sound was my heartbeat. Then came laughter, distant but rising fast like children running in circles around the house. The floorboards vibrated beneath me, rattling dishes in their cabinets. And then, quiet. The candle's flame steadied again, golden and calm. The clock ticked past midnight for the first time in weeks. I thought I'd won, but when dawn came, I found a message scratched into the wall beside my bed. The letters were crooked, carved deep into the plaster. It said, "You broke the rule." Beneath it, fresh mud streaked the floor. I counted again, 6 footprints now. I woke on Saturday to find the message still etched into the wall. "You broke the rule." The words hadn't faded overnight. The grooves were deep, as though carved by something stronger than a knife. I touched the letters, half expecting them to crumble, but they were smooth, polished, almost warm. I barely remember the next few days. I moved like a ghost through my own home. Coffee tasted like dust. The walls seemed to breathe in rhythm with my heartbeat. Every reflection window, kettle, even the shine on the doorknob seemed to show shapes standing just behind me. By Thursday, exhaustion drove me to something desperate. I dragged an old mirror from the attic, tall and framed in tarnished brass, the glass slightly warped. I placed it in the hallway facing the front door. I wanted proof. If something came Friday night, I'd see it. That evening, I noticed the mirror's surface trembling as though ripples of water moved beneath the glass. I thought it was my imagination until my reflection blinked out of sync with me. I froze. My reflection smiled faintly, though my mouth hadn't moved. I covered the mirror with a sheet and went to bed without dinner, but sleep never came. At 11:45, a scraping sound began near the hall. The mirror's cloth fluttered as if stirred by breath. 3 knocks, then the clock stopped. I couldn't move. I stared into the dark hallway where faint moonlight leaked around the edges of the mirror's cover. Something pressed against the fabric from the inside, stretching it outward. A face, childlike, blurred, pushed through, leaving a damp imprint. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" The cloth fell to the floor. In the mirror, I saw them. 5 shadowy figures standing behind my reflection, all facing forward. Their eyes glowed faintly white. Slowly, the reflection lifted its hand and pointed toward me. Then the smallest one, barely more than a smudge of light and movement, stepped forward and whispered, "It's your turn to hide inside." The mirror cracked down the middle with a shriek like breaking bone. I stumbled back. When I looked again, the hallway was empty, but my reflection remained frozen in place, still pointing, and beside it stood a 6th figure. All that Saturday morning, I avoided the hallway. I ate breakfast in silence, never glancing toward the mirror. But no matter where I went, I could feel the reflection watching from the corner of my vision. The air around that part of the house felt colder, heavier, as if the mirror had swallowed the warmth. By afternoon, the crack in the glass began to widen on its own. I heard it while writing in the study, slow, deliberate snapping like ice breaking on a pond. When I finally looked, I saw something worse. My reflection was gone. The hallway showed only an empty corridor, though I stood directly before it. For a few moments I convinced myself it was the light, maybe my eyes playing tricks, but when I raised my hand, nothing in the glass moved. The mirror reflected the door, the wallpaper, the dusty chandelier, everything except me. Then, faintly, movement shimmered deep in the glass, as if the hallway behind the reflection stretched farther than the real one. I leaned closer. My missing reflection stood there, deep inside the mirror world, eyes wide, mouth half open. It looked afraid. "Help me," it mouthed. The lights flickered. The clock in the living room chimed once far too early. Then the voice came again, soft and overlapping. "Friday is coming." I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. My reflection vanished again, swallowed by the silvered glass. But as I steadied myself, I noticed something horrifying. Fingerprints, small and muddy, appeared one by one on the inside of the mirror. They pressed against the glass from within, smearing downward as though sliding hands dragged along its surface. 5 of them, then a 6th, then a 7th, the air filled with a faint humming like children singing through closed mouths. I ran upstairs, slammed my bedroom door, and shoved the dresser in front of it. For hours I sat there, knees pulled to my chest, whispering to myself that Friday wasn't yet here, that I still had time, but when I checked the clock, it read midnight. Friday had already begun, and downstairs something was moving, slow, dragging, deliberate. The game wasn't over, it had only just begun. I didn't move for what felt like hours. My heartbeat echoed in the small room, keeping time with the slow creaks of the house below. Every few seconds I thought I heard breathing, not my own, but deep and rhythmic, like something sleeping inside the walls. When I finally gathered the courage to peek out the window, the night was thick with fog. The trees looked closer than usual, their branches leaning toward the house as if listening. A pale light pulsed from the hallway below. The mirror. I could see it glowing faintly through the crack under my door. Then the knocks began. 3, like before. Then a pause. 3 more. And after a long stretch of silence, a 7th knock, slow and hollow like knuckles on a coffin lid. I stayed perfectly still. The dresser trembled slightly against the door. The smell of damp earth seeped through the cracks in the floorboards. I realized the scent wasn't drifting up from the ground. It was rising through the wood, like the house itself was exhaling. Then came the whispering, soft voices calling names I didn't recognize. They sounded like children at first, but as the minutes dragged on, their tones deepened, turning older, more guttural. "Come down," one of them said, barely more than breath. "It's your turn," another whispered. I covered my ears, but the voices slid under my palms inside my head. The light beneath the door dimmed, flickered, then spread thin lines of silver crawling across the floorboards like veins. They reached my boots and pulsed once, twice. The wood beneath me grew cold enough to sting. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the dresser aside and bolted down the stairs. The house felt alive, walls groaning, pictures rattling, the smell of wet moss thick enough to choke. In the hallway, the mirror's light had changed. It no longer reflected the room, but a forest under a bruised sky, shadows darting between trees. I saw movement there, small shapes running, playing, laughing, and then one of them stopped, turning toward me. It was my reflection, smiling faintly. It raised its hand and knocked, once on my side of the glass. The 7th knock. The moment my reflection knocked, the mirror began to hum a deep vibration that traveled through the floorboards and into my chest. The air grew heavier, pressing against me until every breath felt like dragging smoke through my throat. I couldn't move. The mirror's light flickered between silver and a dull, blood-warm red. My reflection tilted its head, studying me as though waiting for permission. Then, without warning, it pressed its palm against the glass. The surface rippled like water, and I watched my own hand twitch, my body mirroring its movement even though I hadn't meant to. A strange pull began, gentle at first, then stronger, like gravity reversed. My feet slid across the floor. I tried to turn away, but my reflection smiled wider, and my limbs stopped obeying. It was like something invisible had hooked itself behind my ribs. When my fingers touched the mirror, I felt cold, not the kind that numbs, but the kind that listens. The surface gave way beneath my skin. The sensation was impossible, like sinking into ice that wanted me. Behind the glass, the forest waited. I could hear laughter echoing faintly through the trees, those same voices that had whispered in my house. They sounded closer now, almost excited. I tried to pull back, but my reflection grabbed my wrist from the other side. The contact was solid, real, wrong. Its hand was colder than stone. "You wanted to play," it said in my voice. The pull became a violent yank. I screamed, kicking against the floor, but it dragged me halfway through. The smell of wet leaves filled my nose. I could hear the wind in the trees. Then, suddenly, the mirror shattered outward, throwing me to the floor. Silence. The hallway was empty. The mirror lay in pieces, glittering like frost. But something had changed. My reflection was still there, scattered across the shards, each fragment holding a tiny version of me. They moved, Each one blinked, then smiled. Slowly, the reflections began to crawl toward one another across the floor, piece by piece, like a shattered body remembering how to stand. And when they finally joined, I realized it wasn't putting itself back together. It was putting me back together. I don't know how long I lay there on the cold floor. The shards surrounded me like frozen rain, each reflecting a slightly different version of the hallway. Longer, darker, twisted. I didn't want to look, but curiosity dragged my eyes from piece to piece. In one shard, I was standing. In another, I was smiling. In a third, my mouth was wide open, screaming. Then the reflections began to move without me. I watched my fractured cells crawl toward the mirror's center. The pieces didn't clink or scrape. They slid silently, as if pulled by breath. When they met, the glass pulsed faintly, and for one horrifying second all the reflections turned to face me. They spoke in unison. "You're late for the game!" I scrambled backward, slamming into the wall. My head hit the plaster, leaving a dent. The house responded with a groan that came from everywhere at once. I could feel vibrations in my bones. The smell of damp leaves and rot filled the hallway again. I tried to run for the door, but the wood beneath my feet seemed softer, almost spongy. When I looked down, muddy footprints appeared where I stepped, small, then large, then small again, multiplying faster than I could move. The air shimmered with that same strange red light. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Light ones first, children, then heavier, too heavy. They descended slowly, one after another, until they stopped just beyond my view. "Don't look," whispered a voice behind me, but I did. At the bottom of the staircase stood the 5 visitors. No, 7 now. Their shapes were clearer, less shadow, more flesh, but pale, wet, their eyes glowing faintly like drowned lanterns. The smallest one tilted its head and held out a shard of glass to me, dripping with something dark. "Your turn," it said again. I backed away, clutching my chest. My reflection in the shard was grinning, teeth too sharp, eyes too wide. Then, in perfect unison, all 7 lifted their hands and began to count down from 10, slow, deliberate, and playful. When they reached 1, the clock struck midnight. When the lights returned, I wasn't in the hallway anymore. The floorboards beneath me were gone, replaced with cold, wet earth. Fog curled around my ankles and the air smelled of decayed leaves and iron. The house had shifted, or maybe I had. I didn't dare look back. The mirror shards were nowhere to be seen. The 7 visitors stood in a loose circle around me, silent this time. Their forms were clearer than ever, pale and dripping, faces both childlike and ancient. The smallest one stepped forward, holding a long, thin branch of twisted wood, slick with dampness. "You broke the rule," it said. I swallowed hard. "Which rule?" My voice trembled. "Silence! The mirror! The footprints!" The others whispered in unison, their voices layering over one another. But mostly, they didn't finish the sentence. One of the taller figures stepped closer, placing a hand over mine. I jerked it away instinctively, but the hand returned, colder than ice, pressing against my skin. Shock coursed through me, and I realized the rules weren't just for hiding. They were for touching. "You must touch us to continue," the smallest one said, pointing at the circle. I shook my head. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I don't know your rules." They tilted their heads in perfect unison. The tallest figure traced its fingers along the wet ground, leaving glowing footprints that shimmered like moonlight. They moved toward me in a circle, the smallest one hovering closest. I realized then that if I didn't comply, the ground would swallow me. I stepped forward reluctantly, hands trembling, and touched the coldest one first. The second I made contact, a jolt shot up my arm like icy fire. My vision blurred, but I could feel them too, their memories, their laughter, their endless Friday nights. I touched the next, then the next, until all 7 hands were on mine. The ground beneath me stabilized. My vision cleared. My body felt heavier but grounded, tethered to something I didn't understand. And then, just as suddenly, the forest, the fog, and the damp earth vanished. I was back in the hallway, standing in front of the broken shards of the mirror. The house was quiet. The air was warm. Only the faintest muddy footprints remained on the floorboards. I realized the rules weren't just for survival. They were for understanding the game. But somewhere deep in my chest, I knew Friday wasn't over. The following week passed in a haze. I tried to write, to leave, to convince myself the last Friday had been a hallucination. But the house doesn't forget. It waits. I kept hearing faint tapping at night, distant whispers in the walls, and the slow, inevitable tick of the grandfather clock that seemed to count me down instead of hours. Friday arrived with heavy clouds and wind scratching against the windows. I barricaded the front door, stacked chairs across the hallway, and tried to ignore the house. 11:45 came, and the familiar cold air washed over me. 3 knocks followed, soft, deliberate, and patient. Then silence. Then laughter, faint at first but growing louder, weaving through the walls. I knew they were watching, counting. I felt it in the bones of the house. 3 voices whispered my name. I didn't answer. Another knock, harder this time, like wood striking wood, and then a single word, now. The mirror fragments glimmered on the floor. Even broken, they reflected not my face, but a dark hallway I didn't recognize. The reflections moved slightly, beckoning me. I had no choice. I approached cautiously, the floorboards creaking under my weight. Every step felt measured, like the house was timing me. The smallest visitor appeared behind me, almost hovering, its face pale, eyes glowing faintly. It held out a hand, tiny but firm, urging me forward. I hesitated. The other 6 circled silently. I could hear their footsteps echo in perfect rhythm, counting down, 10, 9, 8, 8. My chest ached as I stepped closer to the mirror. I felt the cold pull again, stronger than ever. My reflection inside the shards twitched and beckoned, urging me to join the game. I could hear the countdown in my head now, not just from the floorboards, but from the air itself. 7, 6, 5, each number made the temperature drop me, the fog of fear thicker around me. I realized then that this wasn't just a game of hiding or following rules. It was a test of timing, of awareness, of obedience. And one wrong step meant becoming part of the house. Another shadow, another whisper, trapped for Friday nights to come. I swallowed my fear and moved forward, hand trembling. The smallest one gripped mine, and instantly I felt the pulse of the house, the rhythm of the game. The countdown reached 1. The shards of the mirror pulsed, the hallway stretched impossibly, and the house exhaled, a long, low sound that seemed to shake the walls. Friday had officially begun. I could feel the house breathing now, slow and deliberate, matching my own panicked rhythm. Each inhalation pulled cold air deep into my lungs, and each exhale seemed to carry whispers through the walls. The mirror shards glimmered faintly on the floor, reflecting not me, but the hallway I knew wouldn't exist after midnight. The 7 visitors circled silently, their forms flickering in and out of focus. The smallest one hovered close, its eyes wide, watching for the slightest mistake. I realized the house wasn't just testing my obedience, it was testing my control. One wrong breath, one squeak of fear, and I could be next. I crouched near the fragments, forcing myself to breathe evenly, slowly, deliberately. My pulse thundered in my ears as I tried to memorize the sound of the floorboards, the whispering of the walls, the faintest click of the clock counting time for me alone. Then I heard it, a shallow hiss from behind me. The tallest visitor had stepped closer, face pale and expressionless. Its cold hand brushed my shoulder. I didn't move. My body trembled but obeyed the invisible rule. "Do not breathe too loud," whispered a voice, hollow and layered. I realized then that the visitors weren't just playing, they were shaping me, teaching me the rhythm of their world. Breath was no longer natural. It had become a rule, a measurement, a weapon, each inhalation a choice, each exhalation a potential trap. Minutes or maybe hours passed. I had no sense of time. The fog of fear clouded my thoughts, and then the smallest visitor tilted its head and gestured toward the shards. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I reached out and touched one. The mirror pulsed, sending a shiver through my body. I felt it, the pull of the forest, the whispers of laughter, the faint echo of my reflection calling me forward. My breath caught in my throat. Another pulse, another touch, and I realized the shards were teaching me rhythm. My rhythm, in sync with theirs. I moved, careful not to disrupt the timing, hand trembling against the cold glass. The visitors nodded in unison, approving. And then, suddenly, the hallway shimmered, the floor solidified, the fog vanished. I stood in the hallway I knew, warm air brushing my face. The shards lay inert on the floor, harmless for the first time. I realized with a shiver of dread that I had passed the rule of breath, survived for now. But somewhere deep in the house I could still hear it. The countdown for next Friday. After surviving the rule of breath, I thought I might finally understand the house. I was wrong. The walls no longer felt like walls. They felt alive, stretching and shifting when I wasn't looking. Even the floorboards beneath my feet seemed uncertain, trembling as if waiting for the next Friday. Thursday night I found it. A door I had never seen before, tucked into the corner behind a tall, dusty bookcase. Its frame was old, warped, the wood blackened by age. There was no handle, only a faint outline that looked as if someone had pressed their hands against it for decades. Curiosity overpowered fear. I pressed on the doorframe and it shifted inward, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into darkness. The air smelled of wet stone and decay, like a cellar long forgotten. My heart thumped in my chest, and I wondered if the visitors had hidden this for me, or if they wanted me to find it. I hesitated. A faint whisper came from below, just one voice this time. "Come, play." I swallowed and descended, flashlight trembling in hand. The steps felt uneven, the stones slick with moisture. At the bottom, I found a small chamber, walls lined with mirrors that reflected everything except me. In their depths, I glimpsed shadows, 7 of them, all still watching. The smallest figure appeared first, stepping out from behind a cracked mirror. Its eyes glowed faintly. The door was always here. "You just didn't see it," it said. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "It's where the rules begin," the tallest visitor replied. Its hand hovered over a large blackened shard in the center of the room. "Everything else is practice." I realized then that each Friday, each mirror, each rule had been training, teaching me to survive, teaching me to understand them, teaching me their rhythm. A soft pulse vibrated through the floor, and I instinctively fell into step, feeling the invisible rhythm in my chest. The visitors nodded, approving, and then the whispering started again, not from the walls, not from the floor, but from the shard itself. Names, counting, breathing, laughing, all layered, all perfect. I knew Friday was coming, again, and when it arrived, I would have to face the final rule, the rule of the hidden door. Friday came faster than I expected. The sky was bruised with dark clouds, wind scraping the windows, shaking loose dead leaves across the yard. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stayed in the hidden chamber, staring at the blackened shard, waiting. The visitors were already there, 7 silent shadows in a circle around it, waiting. The smallest one floated closer, tilting its head. Its voice was soft, almost comforting. "You've survived the practice. Now you must follow the final rule." I swallowed. What is it?" The tallest one pointed to the shard. "Touch it, and you may leave." I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the jagged glass, trembling. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. I remembered the mirrored hallway, the footprints, the dragging cold, the way the house had tried to claim me before. But I had learned their rhythm, their rules, their timing. If I didn't act now, I might never leave at all. I reached out. The shard pulsed under my touch, sending shivers through my body. I felt the pull again, the forest, the fog, the voices, and for a moment I almost panicked. Then I remembered the rule of breath, the rule of silence, the hidden door, the game. I exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm flow through me. The shadows leaned closer. I closed my eyes, counting in my head, and let myself move with the invisible pulse of the house. The shard melted beneath my palm, smooth and warm now, not jagged, not threatening. My reflection appeared within it, not fractured, not screaming, but calm, watching me, nodding. When I opened my eyes, the chamber was gone. The hallway of my old house stretched before me, familiar and warm. The shards lay inert, harmless on the floor. The visitors were gone. I was alone. I thought I was free. But as I bent down to catch my breath, I noticed the smallest footprint in the hallway, muddy, faint, and just my size. I froze. Then a whisper, almost inaudible, tickled my ear. "Next Friday." A chill ran through me. I had survived, yes, but the house still remembered. The game wasn't over, not truly. I stood there, trembling, staring at the doorway, knowing that I had beaten them, but at a cost I couldn't yet understand. And somewhere deep inside the walls I could still hear faint laughter. The final rule, it seemed, was not to die, but to return. I woke Saturday morning, sunlight spilling weakly through the grimy windows. The house seemed quiet for the first time in weeks. No dragging footsteps, no whispers, no cold drafts crawling under my skin. I told myself I had survived. I had followed the rules, endured the games, touched the shard, and returned. I had beaten them. Not just quiet, but watchful. I noticed small changes, the wallpaper sagging in impossible angles, shadows pooling where they shouldn't, and the faint smell of wet earth that lingered long after the windows were opened. I thought I had left the forest, the fog, the mirrors behind, but it had left a trace. I stepped carefully over the shards still scattered on the floor. One of them caught my eye. In its reflective surface, I didn't see just my face. I saw them, the 7 visitors, faintly etched behind my eyes, smirking like they knew every thought, every fear, every heartbeat. I staggered back, heart hammering. Then I realized the truth. Survival wasn't escaping. It was becoming part of their rhythm, part of the house itself. The rules weren't just for Friday, they were forever. I thought about leaving, selling the house, running far away. But the front door groaned when I touched it. It resisted, and then the softest of whispers brushed against my ear, familiar, impossible. Next Friday, panic surged. I wanted to scream, to run, to smash the mirror shards, to burn the house down. But something inside me, the rhythm I had learned, the pulse I had followed, stilled me. The house didn't want me dead. It wanted me present, part of the game, a player in an endless loop of Friday nights. I moved through the hallway cautiously. Each step echoed perfectly in sync with the invisible beat. My reflection in the window followed me, smiling faintly, but now it was different. No longer fractured, no longer screaming. It was patient, knowing, like a teacher awaiting the next lesson. and I understood I had survived, but I was changed. I was no longer just human. I had become part of the house, part of the game, tethered to the rules I once feared. I live in an old house. The visitors play by their own terrifying rules, and now, so do I. The wind rattles the windows, the clock ticks past midnight, and somewhere deep inside, the faint laughter begins again. Friday will come, and I will be ready.